good to have like a taste of normal life again.
Now, does that feel like that emptiness that you see and experience? Does that feel unnerving, or does that feel welcome?
What emptiness exactly are you talking about?
Like the emptiness on the beach, like the
Oh, on the
lack of
beach.
foot traffic and people. Because I'm definitely
Well, it's
noticing.
welcome because there's pandemic or not, nobody likes to be on a busy beach. So
Yeah.
the fact that it was secluded was nice, and it kind of gave it kind of a really outdoor, naturey kind of feel, and didn't have to feel the paranoia or panic around having to wear a mask outside on the beach or anything like that. So in this particular case, it was very welcomed.
Wow. I was watching, I listened to Joe Rogan's podcast. I try to catch as many episodes as possible. And then he puts up clips of the various shows on YouTube. And I came across one where he was talking about how there's like a mass exodus right now out of LA, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure maybe the same thing applies to New York as well from what happened there, and also just in speaking to a lot of my friends who were living there, who were from elsewhere. Everyone's kind of returning back to where they were from, which is
Yeah,
And
it's an interesting thing because I think a lot of people are trying to blame it on like, oh, conservatives are only leaving the state because they don't like the way the governor is running it and the Democrats are screwing it up or some kind of political agenda like that. But I think it's just more than just conservatives. I think it's people who can't afford to live here, who are
yeah.
not finding enough work to live up to the cost of living that it takes to live in Southern California. I mean, it's a matter of survival now. And as much as people would like year-round good weather, I think sometimes the only option at this particular point is to move to somewhere that's affordable so you can weather the storm through this entire experience.
You guys have always lived there, right? Your whole lives,
Yeah, born and raised.
born and raised. You couldn't see yourself ever living anywhere else, maybe, right? Or
I could, but I don't know.
where
It's
would
hard
you
for
go?
me because like all my family is
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. For me, it took me a long time to actually picture myself leaving. And now I actually could imagine myself moving somewhere else and setting up some roots in a place where it could be easier to live than here. But the most difficult part is leaving family and extended family because my wife's whole family is here, my whole family's here. And then having a young boy who enjoys having his grandparents around and his aunts and uncles and cousins makes it difficult to rip him away from his family as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your situation is far more complicated. Um,
Yeah.
Not in a bad way either, but you
Him
need
away
you
from
need to be tethered to family. I think it's important.
Yeah.
You're raising.
And it's helpful too. It's been helpful. I don't think I would have been able to make it through this without family's help in raising a child as well.
Hmm.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. That's a big one.
Well, well, I am in Barcelona. It's my second show from Spain, and I got to say I'm loving it here. I think I'm extending my trip by another month. I'll probably go back just before Christmas.
Oh, so
Um,
you were only staying till November?
I was going to stay till, yeah, I wanted to come back for Thanksgiving, and then it was actually my mom who said, "Listen, if you're happy and enjoying yourself over there, there's no reason to come back to the States for Thanksgiving because we probably won't have like obviously we're not going to have like a big family gathering for
Yeah.
Thanksgiving."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just decided to stay here and settle in. I'm still settling in,
So
but
you're 1 week now in Barcelona, right? Or
2 weeks.
longer? Two
I think it's
weeks.
going on. Yeah, it's going on 2 weeks.
So what you been
And
up to out there? Eating?
huh? Just like honestly, just using my appliances. I bought this place and I haven't used it, and there's certain things that are working okay and certain things that aren't. Unpacking boxes, cooking, trying to figure out the whole baking thing.
Yeah.
Oh
Because I was used to the flour that was available and the yeast and I knew my oven and everything back home, and I've had to adjust everything and coming here. And I'm like obsessed with baking, as you know. So every day
Yeah.
I wake up wanting to bake, and I made 2 loaves of bread that didn't come out amazing. It came
What's
out
the
great.
What's the difference? The ingredients, or what do you mean? Or
Just my oven's different, and the commercial yeast here is different. I haven't created my masa. What is it called? Masa madre. Masa, is that right, Laura? Masa madre.
The starter.
Yeah, basically the sourdough starter.
Yeah.
So I need to start that. It's just like a living, breathing thing. You know, you got to feed it every day, and I haven't really had time to deal with that yet.
Yeah.
But, eventually. But I had my first gig on, going back to what we were talking about before with gigs. I had my first gig since March 7th, this past Sunday, in Switzerland.
How'd that go?
You know, great. I mean, Caprice's festival is like, it's been going on for a long time. They book, you know, Villa-Lobos, Sven, a lot of amazing artists over the years. Really happy to have been a part of their lineups all these years. And I was honestly really happy to play in front of an audience again. That felt, I can't even describe that feeling after 7 months of not DJing anywhere. And just doing the streams. But it was a little weird. I can't say that it wasn't. It was a legal event, legally allowed to happen. You had to take a gondola up it takes place like in this kind of ski area, an area called Crans, Montana in Switzerland. And I did a 3-hour set, and you had to take a lift up. And when you're in the car, when you're in the hotel, the common areas of the hotel, when you're on the ski lift going up, and when you're entering the club, you have to wear a mask. But once you're inside, you don't have to wear a mask. And so you're inside a club, and you see like the bouncers and the bartenders, and you just saw the door staff. Everyone's wearing masks, but nobody else is. And you're not. And, you know, the booth is, you know, you got the VIP right behind you. Everyone's spilling, you know, into the booth. The crowd are kind of at a, you know, quite a reasonable distance from you, and separated into zones. There were like 3 zones. The dance floor was separated into 2, and they had like a barrier in the middle. And I just saw the bouncer walk back and forth periodically and control both sides, because everybody was so excited to, you know, to be there and hear music in like this environment that we're all used to being in, that we're, you know, that we're not experiencing right now. And then the VIP were behind me, and no one's wearing masks. So like you're playing, and then people are talking to you, and you're talking to them. And then you keep thinking about, well, what does this mean? What's gonna happen to me after this? All these crazy thoughts, and you're drinking and playing, you're going through the motions that we all go through as DJs, but you're clearly still in the middle of a pandemic. Cases are still rising, especially here in Europe, as well as Switzerland. They just locked down. I was supposed to play D Club in Lausanne next month. And I think 4 or 5 days ago, they decided to lock down all the venues in Lausanne area. And so that club has to remain closed till the end of October or later, depending on the situation. But that's...
You didn't feel paranoid at all to like maybe feel like you want to get tested after something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, I talked to my friend who's a doctor in LA, and he's like, well, what's the point of getting tested? What's that gonna... I got tested like before I left DC for Barcelona. And then since coming back from, I haven't obviously had any symptoms since taking that flight to Barcelona, and I haven't had any symptoms of any kind since the show on Sunday. So I didn't see the point, and he didn't see the point either.
Yeah.
How's the like testing situation out there? Is it really easy to get one? Super fast, easy?
It's pretty easy. It's not, I wouldn't say, I think you can pay to have the results, like extra, to have the results in 1 day, but typically it's 2 days, 48 hours. And there's a lot of places that you can go to.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well,
but it was, yeah, I can't describe the feeling, man. Like, and then we went to, there was another official after party at another kind of structure, kind of area on the slopes that you had to take a gondola up. And it was the same thing there, but I wasn't DJing. I was just kind of hanging, in the little area that they had set aside for, the VIPs and friends of the DJ and all the promoters and their crew. So it was just weird. I'm super happy I did it. But I don't know. Honestly, I haven't reconciled my feelings about it. I don't know how I feel right now about playing. And I think it's okay to be conflicted and not have like a black and white, to take a black and white position.
Sure.
On I'm playing or I'm not playing. I think everyone is conflicted, and some people, everybody has their own reasons for choosing not to play or choosing to play.
Sure.
Or feeling conflicted, but I don't know. How do you, I mean, obviously, in America, nothing's happening. So
yeah, I mean, like I said, I've said this before in the show, and I'll say it again. It's difficult for me to weigh in on my feelings of what's going on in another country because I think other people have a better feeling of what's happening there. I can only speak for myself here in the U.S. It's going to be a long time before any of us play any gigs. You were definitely lucky enough to get out of the country and go somewhere. I don't foresee that happening for me. I don't know about David, but if anybody had asked me any time here in the U.S. to play a gig, it would just be an absolute no.
yeah, in the
I mean,
U.S.
I'm dying. Yeah, in the U.S. I mean, I'm dying to get out. I'm dying to, and it's funny because even when I was touring and playing gigs, I'm not the most social person either. I'm not like an extrovert who just like wants to party. I usually play my gig, I hide in my corner, and I hang out with my friends that do my thing, and I kind of vanish. But I am feeling like more social than I ever have in so long. Like I want to hang out with people. I want to do things,
Yeah.
obviously. But I don't see that happening for us here in the US for a while. That's kind of depressing. It's been a very, very depressing past couple weeks, particularly for me here in the US.
Yeah, my friend also said that he warned me against dining indoors where no one's wearing. Obviously, you're not wearing masks if you're dining. He's like, there's a 200% increase that you could contract it, and it seems like he's a trauma surgeon. I can't remember the name of the hospital in LA, but he's he talks to a lot of doctors. He's always advising me, and he said try not to eat indoors. So I don't see a big difference between dining inside a restaurant with other people around or partying in a club with other people around. I mean, it's the
maybe
same era.
we should bring our guest in and see if she can weigh in on this conversation a little bit as well.
Yeah, so a lot of people are probably wondering, so like after Carl Cox last week, who is Sophia Days? And what's she doing? Sophia Says. See, I'm lit. Sophia Says. And what is she doing on our show? But like, we're really excited to have her on. Hello, Sophia. There she is.
Hey, guys.
Hello. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to have Sophia on as well. I mean, I've seen her grow exponentially in her career in the most recent time. Extremely talented musician and DJ as well. Based out of New York, right?
I was based out of New York
Sophia?
for about 8 years. Yeah, I recently moved out, but that was sort of my home base in the States. Yep.
So it was
Awesome.
Mo.
Well,
You're the one that first. I'd heard your name before, and I think I might have even come across. You did that remix for Prey, which was that song
for the French electro band.
So I'd heard your name before, but like it came to the forefront when Mo mentioned you, and then started to look into it. And your music is
Mo's been extremely helpful. I would say it's like really nice to kind of, as you're developing as a younger artist, to get support like that from like the grassroots, and he's been like just incredible with that. And it's definitely something that doesn't go unnoticed. And just like throughout the years, from the very start, I feel like when I first heard Mo play, they were doing the Interface party back in Amsterdam, like this is like 6 years ago. And I remember just like going up to their whole crew and just being like, who are these people, and just like just sending him stuff, and just like from something as basic as like him taking the time to listen to my demos through just, throughout like just giving me opportunities. It's been really nice to have, support like that.
Yeah,
So how long
absolutely.
ago did you meet Mo?
Well, I didn't actually officially meet Mo until like at that point I was just like, I was just like a fan going to their show in Amsterdam. This was AD in 2014, sorry. And then I think I can't recall the first time we actually met. I think
I
we
think I think it was on Halloween party that CLR did at a warehouse, I believe,
yeah,
backstage right before it was going on. Me and
yeah,
Chris were supposed to go back to back at a party, and then somehow the police shut it down. But I believe that's where we first met
yeah.
backstage then.
It was so organic, to be honest. Like, I feel like my first actual interaction with him was just like sending him stuff, and then just from there, just like I said, just getting support like that is so important for artists as they're starting off, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you don't forget later on,
Yeah. So let's start from the beginning. You're from Belize, Georgia.
Yes,
For the
I'm from
people that don't
Tbilisi.
know.
I was born there. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
difficult. Georgian stuff. It's Tbilisi. Yeah, I was born and like semi-raised there. Had a little bit of like a atypical background. I kind of grew up all over the place. My parents were political refugees, so we moved around a lot. I lived in a lot of different countries. Had to learn a lot of different languages, and obviously got influenced musically with respect to that. And then I spent a lot of time in Philly, and then I moved out to New York. But in between, like I said, I was living in a lot of different places, DC being one of them. And Ali, I used to come to your shows, actually, the Deep Dish nights.
We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah. But wait, is your real name Sophia Says?
My real name is Sophia. My last name is not Says. I used to release like trip hop records and like house records back in the day, and so I had a lot of different like names, and one of them was my actual last name. So, and Georgian last names are really difficult to pronounce, so I figured it would be best to kind of shorten it up, not to days to say. So it was.
Yeah.
And it's not Saze or something. Mo, wasn't you the one that tried to correct us that it's not Says or
Was
me?
it?
I think
No,
you were like,
I think because you guys were calling them days.
No, yeah.
Is that what it was?
Georgian last names are actually, they all end in like ZE or Shvidi, but it's pronounced like Aze, so you would assume it's it's a different pronunciation, but mine I took on for a different reason, but it says yes.
Maybe you have a doppelganger.
It's funny. We had argued in our chat so much how to pronounce the last name so much that I actually had to like call CEO and ask CEO on the phone, like, dude, set the record straight. How do we do this?
I know.
He was laughing.
So
what's your full last name then?
Go ahead.
My full last name is Chumburidze in Georgian, but that letter, it doesn't exist in other languages. So it's like it's like a TCH sort of. It's difficult on the tongue. So it would be impossible. It would just constantly get butchered. And like when you're on like customer service lines, it's you gotta go through like, all right, C as in cat, you go through the whole thing. It's like I can't be doing this in music. So.
Yeah, I know what that's like to get your last name butchered.
Oh man.
And mine seems like mine is Shirazinia. It seems quite easy, but like my entire life in America, everyone butchered it. Like I have no idea why. So how old were you when you left Belize?
The first time I moved out, I was about 5 or 6. I had to go through Russia at first. I moved to Russia, then I moved to the States, and then my parents sort of had like a mental breakdown, naturally leaving your country and just like everything your whole life and just being forced out. So we moved back when I was 8, flipped back on this side of the pond. And then I lived in Canada, I lived in Philadelphia, DC, Paris, New York, Delaware, of all places. I moved around quite a bit. And obviously most recently I'd moved out to Berlin and back. Now I'm in Philadelphia again. So,
and so you moved,
a nomad.
You moved with your parents? Are you an only child, or do you have brothers and sisters?
I have 2 older sisters. I moved with my parents initially, just to kind of, that was just the natural flow and just obviously being a young person. And then like then you kind of adapt to becoming a nomad. So you're just like, all right, well now this is my flow. And it kind of becomes like difficult for you to settle in one place, which I think in many ways, like as a touring artist, is like, it's kind of like one and the same. It becomes like the essence. So that part of it was never difficult for me in the touring aspect, just being able to like pick up your stuff and go, because it was like part of my upbringing.
And what's your like earliest musical memory? Like what made you, Sophia Says, want to become a musician?
Well, I think it's like a few things. Like in Georgia, I feel like this idea of like cult like creative acclamation from young age is kind of like a thing everybody does. So everybody takes piano classes, everybody takes art classes, but it's very much like character building. It's like it's not seen as something you can actually have a career. And so I started playing piano when I was like 8 years old, like properly, and then I was like a dancer for 10 years. I did that professionally. And so, but again, like I started like composition quite young, but it was one of those things I was like, you're never actually going to have a career in this, and it was never something that was like seen. So I kind of pursued like academics and just end up, going down that route. And at some point, like your creative urge just kind of takes over, I think. And so at some point it was like very difficult, like the lines were just becoming too blurred, and I decided to kind of do it professionally. But I started pretty young, like I was making music since I can remember, so.
And
but the actual
I think also
whole other thing. So
your talent as a musician playing the piano is not an understatement, though. I mean, you got some chops. You could play.
thanks. So sometimes it's one of those things you kind of like, you have to, it's like a muscle, you kind of always have to be, you always have to be exercising it. But it is nice to like, just like, that's always kind of like a starting point for me. Just sit down, play piano, and just let it flow.
So you're classically trained. Like you can you read music as well?
I do, poorly at this point, but I do. But I was like, just like when I was like sort of younger and just trying to like express myself, I would sit down and try to write. And I think it's always in you, from the start. But it's not a career option.
Did your family have a background in music, or was it just you that was interested?
Both my mom and my sister went through conservatories, and my eldest sister, she took it a bit more seriously. I was also in like a music school kind of conservatory when I was younger, but they were a lot more developed in it, I would say. So having that influence was nice, but I think it was more like me wanting to do it. I wouldn't say that my family or put it on me.
Were they supportive of your decision to pursue a career in music, or like my parents?
My life is like, because it's not a very typical, I mean, we're not talking about like classical music, it's the lifestyle around it, the late hours, the sort of hustle you have to go through when you're like, when you're first getting, going from like having a day job to not having a job, really is not being steady. I think for any parent it's difficult, but at the same time, I think that like my parents knew I worked really hard, and I was like very eager and determined to achieve things. So I think once they started seeing it sort of manifest, it was different. But no parent really wants their kid to be a DJ, in the sense of, unless you come from an artist family.
Well,
yeah,
the hustle definitely.
You tell us. I mean, you have a kid, it's a little daunting.
Yeah,
but
the hustle never stops.
Like my parents have been very supportive from the very beginning, but I know with them, like if I wasn't successful with it, they probably would have not been very supportive.
Yeah.
It was just like, what are you doing? Then like give up, get a job. Why don't you get a real job?
Yeah, my mom was always supportive, but my dad just would bite into it at all. He was just like, what the hell are you doing? Even till today, why are you still wasting your time with that shit? Wow. That happens.
Yeah, but once you start, like, they just want to make sure that you're able to sustain yourself, financially. Yeah, and once they get those assurances, then they start leaving you alone. It was the same with me and my Persian upbringing. So you moved from Belize to where first? Philadelphia?
To Philadelphia, yes.
Was that because your family had connections to other people from Georgia and Philadelphia, or from the hometown that you're from?
Well, I think with a lot of like immigrant families, you kind of, especially if it's a town where there's like, not as many, Georgians or whatever your ethnicity is, like you kind of find like one home base. They're like, oh, one family, and then all right, we're all going there, and then everybody just kind of goes to the same place. I think in LA, like there's a lot of Persians in LA, for example, and so certain hubs start to become very much like.
I'm still angry at my parents for not going straight to LA and opting for.
Why so?
They went to Virginia.
But you guys, I mean, both of you guys are from like East Coast upbringing then, right?
Yeah, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, you guys were both raised over in
The East Coast,
DC
yeah.
and Philly, right? Never.
We got a whole
Just
West
for the
Coast,
West
East
Coast,
Coast battle
yeah.
going on over here.
Yeah. So
But
Sophia,
there is a different vibe for sure.
do you prefer East Coast hip hop or West Coast hip hop?
All right. Well, that's a tricky question. I'm not going to go down this route.
Nothing tricky about it.
Make some
Just
enemies
preference.
today.
You know what? I'll tell you this
You
much. Growing up, I always loved
can-
East Coast hip hop more. So
Yeah, the
well,
90s.
absolutely. But like just for the purposes of not starting a war, I'm gonna deviate by saying that I've been getting into like a lot of like the UK stuff recently, like UK grime and just like European grime in general. It's actually like pretty good. Some of it's like you go
I
down
would
the
agree.
rabbit hole. But I'm not gonna answer the West to East Coast, because like
It's an incriminating.
You're not saying which is better. You're just saying I like.
What do you prefer?
I prefer the East Coast stuff versus
Because we value your opinion, and so does everyone watching.
absolutely. I mean, I would say like it's torn. Like it's like I feel like also it's just a matter of like when, right? Like I mean, like historically, yeah, absolutely East Coast. Like I find myself like lately, like it's also dependent on the timing, right? Like hip hop now is very different, and I embrace parts of it, but I would say traditionally very much so on the East Coast.
And were you into hip hop when you were younger? Is that why you mentioned you used to produce trip hop?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Philly, like definitely kind of ingrained that in many ways, like R&B and hip hop culture here. And I think just like, yeah, there's just something about like the rhythmic flow of hip hop that I've always enjoyed. Like it allows you space to kind of like, from a production standpoint, it's like, it can be very thoughtful, in contrast to like techno and just like more dance floor. Like, so, and I've been like diving into it over like coronavirus too. Like, it's been really nice to kind of revisit old projects and just kind of like, it's just such a different sway and swing, and like lyrically is a whole other subject. Sometimes, I find myself like not even paying attention to some of the lyrics, and I know it's awful to say, but the beats are so good, so you're just like, I really embrace that side of it, at least with like hip hop currently. But definitely Philadelphia had a lot to do with that.
And were you, do you know, I'm guessing you were going to Fluid to see Josh Wink play, or going to 611, Nigel Richards record store, 611, and just going to all the events that they were all, that whole crew were a part of. Was that like something that really solidified you wanting to continue down that path?
It's like, obviously being in Philadelphia, I mean, being back, I've been like revisiting the whole Ovum catalog and just like, refreshing my memory. I will say at the time I was definitely not listening or going to anything related to electronic music, because growing up in like a Georgian household, you do not go out like that. The concept of going out. So I think, not that it necessarily has to be one and of the same, like going out and listening to electronic music, but I think for a lot of people, it's, at least for me, it started out in that way. So I was definitely listening to a lot more hip hop growing up here than I was to electronic music. But certainly, like, as I like developed, like I said, like most recently, especially, like I've just been like diving back into all of Josh's old stuff, and I think it's really respectable that he's always stayed here too. I always like really valued that. Yeah.
And
kept it real.
Definitely.
Did you like, was it in terms of electronic music or even hip hop culture or whatever, was it like the DJ that was the focus for you, or was it the production? Were you more interested in being a producer as opposed to like a DJ? And then like the DJing thing obviously comes later and happens as a byproduct of you becoming more established as a producer. Like,
I didn't even consider DJing, honestly, till like my friends were like, you have to DJ, because if you're making this music, you need to learn how to DJ. I started out as a producer. I was like very much only interested in doing that. And in many ways still am, but have found ways of like enjoying the performative sides of it. Like, because as you develop technically, you're like, okay, I can add more to this than just like this like standard interpretation. But for me, it was very much like production driven always. I mean, for me, there's like no nicer feeling than just like having like solid sessions in the studio and just like that kind of like rhythm of, and obviously now during this time we've been so lucky in that, you know, and I've been really diving into that. But as well, like I said, performance, as I started to kind of perfect myself more technically, I started to enjoy bits of it that I couldn't really enjoy just from initially just learning how to DJ, like a very flat interpretation of just, okay, now you have to DJ. But my friends basically forced me into it. They were like, all right, listen, like there's this after hours, it was called Beef Cuts in New York. It was like the grungiest, nastiest place you definitely didn't want to walk into. And they just kind of like threw me on, and they were like, you gotta, this is how it goes, and you just gotta do it. And yeah, I have come to enjoy it, but production first always.
When did you actually start producing and then getting into DJing?
I started like actually putting out records in college. Like I had my first like few releases like in university. And I didn't really know how it all worked. I just kind of like sent some stuff I was working on to labels, and they seemed to like it. I was like, all right, well, I guess this is how it goes. You send a track to a label, they release it. And this was, I was like maybe 20 at the time. And it was like a combination. It was kind of across the board, but definitely starting to gear towards electronic music. And then my first like actual signing was with Nervous Records. Actually, it was a house, when I was doing like some houseier stuff. And then when I reevaluated my style, I was like, okay, I probably need to have some kind of flow around this. Then actually like took it seriously and adopted a name. And
was the house record under a different name or under your?
Oh yeah, and I'm not saying that.
Why? There's nothing.
You're ashamed of it?
Yeah. It's all really nice looking back, you know, in retrospect, but there was just a lot of it at that point. I wasn't confident in like one style. I was just kind of jumping all over the place. Still in a way kind of my style, but you know, it's part of it. It's part of like growing, I guess.
I feel that. I mean, I've released records under different aliases that I would never tell anybody myself.
But Nervous Records is like pretty legendary label. I mean, I feel like that's kind of a big deal to have under the belt, even if it's something that you might not want to associate yourself with these days.
And I think it also, you know, it tells people who want to get into this industry that, like, you know, you can start in this one place and end up somewhere completely different, and that's all part of your path. And I don't think you should be ashamed of or just not wanting to highlight, maybe ashamed is too strong of a word, not wanting to highlight that part of your career based on where you are now with the music that you make. Now, do you feel like, what was it about like electronic, like you had a classical music education, right? Were you just not finding what you were looking for in that genre, and electronic music offered, you know, new possibilities, like more exciting possibilities? Like, why choose electronic music as opposed to continuing down the path of maybe being a classical composer?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I actually find that there's a lot of parallels between classical music and like very intense like club music, you know. I guess like house, you know, it's not so much that I think you're right. That's a very good conversation as well. This idea of like embracing what you do early on, and like there were definitely moments where I was like, oh, you know, it's like Nervous, Ministry of Sound. I was like, but for me it was that I just didn't relate to that sound. I just wanted to learn how to make it. You know, I just always was like eager to like learn how to make every possible genre, because I just want to know how it's like, just deconstruct it and know how it's made. And then I think with club music, like more like, you know, I guess not to put it in a box, but techno, right? Let's say, like, I find that the intensity of techno is very similar to classical music in many ways. Like it has this sort of like, I don't want to say like rigid structure, because obviously like, but when you compare it to like jazz, like, which is a bit more freeform, or like even house, I think it opens up like different doors that like techno and classical music doesn't. And I found it to be very similar. It was like kind of two extremes, you know, in a way, but at the same time, very like, had a lot of like similarities. So I think it was that, probably Mo's interface party too at AT, that was a big part of it. I mean, really, that is something that I think like gets overlooked, like the aspect of like, I'm a very visual person as well. So I've always like done a lot of like video work, and like I was like making art when I was younger too. And so like seeing it being manifested and like in production, that experience, like experiential side of it is so overwhelming, you know, especially if like sonically and just you're just being like stimulated from all. And so I think it was just very exciting and exhilarating, but like house didn't necessarily do that for me, I guess. You know, it's just a little bit of it. It's not that there's like a house techno argument, because I love so much house music. It's just that like the intensity of like the experience, I guess.
Yeah. I think for anybody who doesn't know what the interface parties that we did, but we used to do a series of warehouse parties in the US, all over New York, Denver, Detroit, Los Angeles. And we also took it over and did quite a few shows during ADE in Amsterdam, but they were these audio visual shows we would do where the VJs were just as much of a headliner as the DJ was as part of the show. And in Amsterdam, we would do these like full 360-degree visual installations. And it was a lot of fun to have that dynamic play between the music and the video.
And those were fun parties.
And
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
so inspiring for the people there, and like I hope you know that, you know, because like I remember being at one there like years ago, and I was just like, you know, that's somebody's day one, you know, and so like that was a huge part of it. I was pretty bummed, you know, when that all kind of like stopped, but like I said, like the continuity and like just having that as like a foundation, you're just like, whoa, okay, there's a lot I can do here.
Who was your house music? Go ahead.
Was that interface party like kind of your first introduction to like big techno parties? Or
no, not first introduction to big techno parties. I would say being in like the middle of like AD was my first introduction to like, wow, there's a whole industry around this, you know, which I hadn't seen in New York, because I was just going to like really grimy after hours, you know. And so when I actually saw it being put into like a professional production, I was like very much inspired, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like a lot of us, you know, who've been in the industry for a long time, and maybe our roots were in house music, like we name check people like Todd Terry or Masters of Work as our house kind of heroes. Who was your house hero that led you eventually to release a record on Nervous?
Well, I would say like earlier on, like, you know, there was, and throughout even today, you know, like I it's always been like a combination of different people. I always like find it difficult to answer these questions of like the favorite, because realistically it's never really one, you know. But I would say like a lot of like Omar S, you know, DJ Q was a huge inspiration as a person too. Like Ramon is just like an incredible human. And just, but like David's music as well, honestly, like, you know, I know he stepped out, but like a lot of his records were like, you know, massively inspirational. Levon, of course. And like, there's just sort of these like staples that everybody listens to, you know, coming in. You just stepped back, David, but I was just saying like how a lot of your work has inspired me as well, like from an earlier.
Yeah, good timing, David.
Yeah.
Real good timing, dude.
But thank you very much.
But honestly, like, you know, that inspiration never really faded. I think maybe it was just more like a lot of like the house music in that era too is starting to kind of blur into like deep house, which kind of became a different, you know, like different thing, which I respect as well. But just, you know, you just have to find yourself, right? Like what works for you sonically. And those lines, especially now, everything's getting blurred. And I think that's really cool actually to hear that in production. Like you listen to tracks, things are like, it's not house, not techno, it's not pop, it's not, you know, it's very interesting from a production standpoint.
Do you enjoy that feeling of people not being able to pigeonhole? I mean, we're gonna get to your sort of sound. I listened to your albums today on repeat for like 5 hours. But do you find that you enjoy people not being able to like put you in a neat little box, you know, like you kind of exist and you keep people guessing. You exist in between genres and sometimes there's a nod to one versus the other, but you are hard to kind of pigeonhole and put into like a neat little.
You know, like it kind of goes back to what we were saying about like this idea of like experimenting with different styles versus like committing to one and just like saying, you know, because it's a really difficult question, because I think like for me at least I struggled a lot with that, with this it was like very daunting, this idea of like having to have one style so that people can kind of constantly follow something and they can latch on, versus like realistically what really happens, which is you step into the studio and one day you're making one thing and another day you're making something completely different. And then you're like trying to organize that into, you know, I found myself lately starting to become more, I would say, streamlined, you know, and like being able to, but I think it's from a technical standpoint. I'm now able to like technically weave those things in a way that's consistent, versus in the past they were just like very separated, I guess. So it was like, it was kind of all over. And now I find myself, you know, just being able to like work that all in, I guess.
And you've never had a manager that says, hey, you should make hard, fast techno.
Oh, everyone I mean, if it's not your manager, it's some kid in like some rave.
If you really want to be successul, Sophia, you'll listen to me.
Yeah, it's always something. But you know, like even like I was like revisiting a lot of like Richie's older stuff too, and like I just think it's a technical, like from a technical standpoint, there are ways to be able to start weaving these things. You just can't really do that when you're first starting off, because you don't know how to achieve those effects. You don't know how to like be able to blend in like a 30-second snippet into your live show while it's still very much a techno show, but you can work those in better. You kind of like massage it in. You just can't do that when you're younger. So it's like, all right, one day you're making this, second day you're making something totally different.
Yeah. I'm interested, like, what is your connection to like the current scene in Tbilisi? Were you always familiar of its development, or were you surprised to find out that your hometown was such a like a staple in techno?
Yeah, it's the scene in Georgia is, I mean, I'm so proud of how far it's come. I would say there was a period of time like where I wasn't visiting as frequently actually, but when I, you know, like in the last 5 years, I've definitely been going back about like 2-3 times a year, most recently for Bassiani, of course. And then like and Bassiani is actually like in my old neighborhood where I was born. So it was like that soccer stadium there was just like a bazaar there ages ago. Like it was like not really being used for anything. And I think the scene in Georgia is really impeccable, because you have to keep in mind that it's a third world country, very much, maybe at this point gotten better, but the average like raver there, they're spending their last like, you know, bits of money just to buy that ticket so that they can go out. And we also, there's no drugs in Georgia, you know, so they're there and they're committed and they're very much like, for DJs playing there, the intensity that you feel there is because it's real, you know, it's coming from a place of struggle, and which obviously is like the birthplace of like dance music, right? So like, but I am still amazed that like every time I go back, it's so surreal to see that, you know. I mean,
the context behind my question was because, I mean, I really never knew that there was such an incredible scene going on in Georgia until me and David were invited to play out there. And when I got there, I mean, just playing just absolutely blew my mind. I could not believe that this was existing, and I had no idea it was happening. And obviously it's such an incredibly popular city, name dropped by many of our techno peers now. So
did you guys play Bassiani or you played a different event?
Yeah, we played Bassiani. I mean, it was such an incredible gig to play.
How long has that club been around?
I actually don't know the exact.
Let's see.
To my understanding, I've been seeing it like kind of in the past like 5 years, but I don't. They had their anniversary party, I think, last
2014 is when it opened, actually.
Yeah. Oh. Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So you were living in Philly, and then when did you arrive in DC? That was your next stop?
Yeah, I came to DC because I got a full scholarship to George Washington. And I was like, well, I don't have to pay for it. I'm good. Yeah, like thanks to like my parents like enforcing academics for like my whole, thanks to not going out, you know, and partying in high school. So I went to DC for 4 years, which I would love to ask you about actually, because obviously you're from there. So
I went to Montgomery College for 4 years, and it's only a 2-year community college. So that tells you all you need to know about my college education or lack thereof. I was,
the experience, because I know you guys were doing like, obviously like I was going to those parties like when I was in college, and like, I mean, it's just DC is also such an interesting place, you know, because it's like everybody there has something to say politically, and that and dance
Yeah.
music doesn't go hand in hand. So
No, I mean, we had, yeah, go-go music. Vaughn Mason was a big producer from the DC area, the Basement Boys. There were some Mandrill who recorded for New Groove. There's so many others that I can't. Thievery Corporation came later.
yeah, those 18th Street Lounge
Yeah,
nights was
yeah.
definitely there.
Yeah, it's so funny to talk to somebody who knows these.
Yeah. It's funny because I connected with Rob like years later, you know, and obviously like they were still like very much, you know, doing the same stylistically, like and it was just like total nostalgia going back to that. I mean, it was an incredible place. Like those Wednesday nights that they had there were like awesome.
Yeah, I mean, for such a conservative city, there was a period of time in the late 80s, early 90s where it was just incredible. Like the variety of music that you could find on any given night. And then you obviously had the punk scene. So there's a lot of DC Space and 930 Club and a lot of other punk venues. The old 930 Club, I can't tell you how many times I sneaked out of my parents' home and went downtown and caught a show and came back and they didn't even notice. And, you know, ended up failing miserably at school as a result of all those nights going out. But like that helped shape, you know, and continue to you know, feed me in terms of like, you know, I just wanted to absorb as much and as you know, varied music as possible. And that was a real pivotal time for me. And then when I started to play locally and it just was a really, really exciting time to be in DC.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so how many years did you spend in DC? And what
I was
was
there for 4
it?
years. Yeah. Just like I was living on campus for 4 years. And I actually my second question to you about that was like, how was the Baltimore scene back then? Because I've like been really diving into like more recently. I hadn't been like back then, but I didn't realize that there was like such a huge scene out there, you know, and like went to ask how obviously being like just next to DC, how was it back like before?
They were like, Baltimore was really, really great as well. And I think it was the Buzz guys, they were doing events there. And they were using, I think it was called Shelter. It was an amazing club. And a lot of the Baltimore house DJs were very much influenced by what was happening in New Jersey and New York and how the clubs were designed and the sound systems were designed and the DJ booths. And so a lot of the clubs in Baltimore tended to mirror a lot of the, you know, quintessential classic New York clubs.
Yeah.
So the sound was really, really important in Baltimore clubbing circles. And there was a lot of crazy, and, you know, these house clubs would let Buzz come in and do their kind of ravey events and have people like Joey Beltram and other techno DJs play. But it was exciting. I mean, it was just a mission to get out there.
Yeah.
I remember sometimes going all the way out there and not being able to get in because there's too many people that wanted to go inside that could fit, and we didn't want to wait, and there was always drama. But
so there was a sort of club culture there, because I always assumed that it was just like predominantly warehouses, and I'd never heard of like really.
There were a lot of warehouse parties, yeah.
Yeah.
That old club Buzz, that was in DC, right?
Yeah, that was a club called Nation, and they hosted the Buzz were doing their events there, packing it in both areas, and then there were also regular concerts that were happening that I would go see.
Was there ever much of a scene in Richmond?
Nah, just it was Teddy Riley and the Neptunes.
Okay.
Not that. Yeah, not that.
Sophia, what were you studying in school when you were going?
So I started off studying international relations because I was like, you know, my background was just like fitting for that. I guess I spoke multiple languages, like had always. So I went to like get into like diplomacy. I was working for like the Georgian embassy at the time, just like interning. And then I realized like I had to make money in life. And so I was like, you know, something a bit more practical, because actually like when I was working at the embassy, it was just a lot of diplomacy is just nothing really gets done, you know. You're just kind of like in this environment and people are just like talking all day, but there's no action around it. So I was like, all right, let me switch my degree to something more practical. So I switched over to the business school. I had a marketing degree with a minor in international business. And yeah, just an influence of like a Georgian upbringing and this sort of voice in the back of your head telling you that you have to do something that's practical, you know. And while it's easy to discourage people out of that now, when you're actually going through it, it's like very daunting, you know. There's always this like voice in your head, like you need to have a real job, you know, you can't do anything creative, like that's not going to be an actual profession. So.
And how many languages do you speak?
I speak 5. Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
what are they?
Georgian, Russian, it was my second language. I can read and write, but, you know, and understand a lot of it. But again, it's a muscle. English, Spanish, and French.
Wow. That's cool.
And
But
you were,
languages are like one of those things you kind of like, what, like I find myself like the other day I was trying to remember, like, you know, just like I always forget like sayings and terms, like, and I always joke about like the nail on the hammer or the hammer on the head. Like I was like, can't like remember, because you start thinking in like different languages, you know, at some point. So when you're in a place, so when you're practicing it, it comes back easily.
so were you juggling like a day job and school with music making at night? And was it,
yeah.
were you realizing as you were doing that, if you were doing that, were you realizing that it's music where like that music is your happy place, and the practical career path, while it may be practical and you can benefit with a steady job and steady income and stuff like that, that's not where you were meant to go? That wasn't your calling?
So I had already started releasing records in college and like starting to like dip my feet in it, I guess. And then when I moved to, well, I first got recruited like to work for the CIA out of college, but I didn't take the position, which was really like an insecure thing. Yeah, but just because of the background, like they're always looking, like a lot of government agencies in DC are always looking to scout out, you know, talent from the schools, and they kind of seek you out. And I guess I fit like the profile of like a Russian spy or something, like Eastern European spy, you know? So they were like, okay, so they kind of give you like these like offers. And then I decided to take a job with Citibank. I worked on Wall Street for 4 years in New York. But again, like already in that process, I was already very much like, you know, diving into music and releasing stuff. And then, you know, my friends forcing me to like learn how to DJ. And I think really like when I went to Amsterdam was the first time that I considered it as like an actual job that I could maybe, you know, switch over to. Because I saw like an industry around it, which I wasn't really seeing in New York, because it was, you know, you're just going to parties. I'm like, I can't just like live in parties, you know? So, and then when I was, you know, I basically called in like my 2-week notice at some point. I was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to do this, figure it out. Wasn't so easy, obviously, from the start, but you kind of learn the ropes as you go along. You have some nice people who help you along the way, like Mo, you know. So other than that, yeah, there's no guideline, right? There's no book.
And that's from while you're still in New York, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you stayed in New York how long?
For 8 years. And that's another thing. I feel like for a lot of artists in New York, that's like so easy to just get discouraged out of just life in general because of rent, you know. It's so unreal. And I feel, you know, a lot of artists make that decision to move to Europe. It's not that they're abandoning the States, it's just that it's just very difficult, you know. You just can't put food on the table. So I was working like, you know, multiple jobs before I was like actually starting to be able to sustain off of touring. So
and from there you went to Berlin?
Well, Berlin was till just
recent.
Berlin was very recently, just basically like my agency pulled me out there, and they were like, you know, it's more practical, right? When you're there, you can actually start piecing stuff together. But up until then, I was like, I'm not going to do the Berlin thing, you know. I'm not going to be the cliche, you know. I don't want to do it. But
that's why I ended up in Barcelona, because I didn't want to. Like, so many friends in Berlin going, move to Berlin, dude. I didn't want to be that guy.
Isn't Barcelona isn't it the same in Barcelona now? Like there's tons of artists moving to Barcelona.
I mean, there has been for a while now, over the last 10 plus years, but it doesn't have that cachet that Berlin has.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like what I always tell people is like people move to Berlin to become DJs the same reason people move to LA to become actors.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So Sophia, like when you're watching a movie and there's like a really great CIA character, you never think to yourself, that could have been me.
Always.
Why did I choose music? I could have been a CIA agent. And
I always like laugh about it because I think like I never heard about my friends who actually like went on to take those positions. I'm like, whatever happened to those people? Because you just never hear about them again,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of goes with the job, I guess.
Well, because it's undercover
Yeah.
work. You're not gonna
But I always joke that like if whoever was the recruiting manager at the time, like if they looked at like, oh, what is Sophia up to now? It's like, wow.
They probably know.
Just like
You'd send a postcard if you were an agent. You just periodically, like a cryptic postcard from wherever you are.
yeah.
Do you have friends in the CIA?
Well, like a few
people that work there.
University went on to take the positions. Like, so the way that like they recruited me at least was like they go through somebody that they know that who works for them, and then they'll contact like everyone around you, like they interview like your elementary school teachers and like your friends. It's just this crazy process, and just it just wasn't exactly the thing I was looking for in life, let's say.
Yeah. So has this situation that we're in now made you want to go knocking on their door again, or wait it out like the rest of us?
Yeah, actually, is that something like?
Are they hiring right now?
But is that an opportunity that's always there for you, or is it like once they ask and you say no, that's it?
Oh, I mean, once you become a DJ, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what would be a better cover for a CIA agent than to
totally.
be a DJ?
Exactly.
You could be a secret spy, travel all over the world.
You would be the first DJ/musician CIA agent.
What a perfect cover.
It's so blatantly obvious that they would never think it's you. So.
Yeah, totally.
Because DJs travel country to country, in and out in one day within hours sometimes. That's
if we're onto something, I might have to, like you said, knock on their door again.
Go hit up the CIA. Go hit up the CIA and be like, "Hey, I want to start a new DJ division. That'll be the perfect cover."
Yeah. And say you got some famous DJ friends that will potentially sign up as well. The longer this thing goes on.
Someone in the comments puts Sophia Spy says.
Time for another beer. I'll be right back, guys.
That maybe.
Actually, we never got into what you're drinking, Sophia.
Oh, so right. So I myself am more of a cider person. So I've got a stack of ciders on me today. This is a very standard Angry Orchard. But what I like about the cider culture is it's very similar to like beer culture. Just the small breweries, like the sort of like local shops, and but the taste is more fitting for me, I guess. So.
You not like beer, or just not?
I love like Mexican beers, like lagers and like lighter beers, but I'm not like a Pilsner like stronger taste person. I do enjoy the flavor of it. It's so pungent, it kind of dries out my mouth. I'm just not a fan of that,
And my another question is, do you think the Georgian wines are the best wines?
Oh, of course, of course, no question.
Honestly, when we were there, when I was there with Mo a couple years ago. I didn't really know. I don't really know much about the country, and I didn't know that it was such a big wine country.
Yeah,
I don't know, for some reason you don't.
You guys have a lot of wines when you were there, then hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I did, and even at the
I don't remember.
There's a huge wine shop in the airport, and they let you drink all these wines, and I was like, I had no idea that Georgia was known for its grapes, and like even the guy who invited us to the house, he made his own like grape juice, and remember that, Mo?
Yeah, I remember that.
I just didn't know, I didn't know much about that country, and I was really impressed with the wine.
What's funny too about that thing is I've never actually had fresh grape juice before. I mean, like people usually make like artificial out of a canned grape juice, but that time in Georgia was like the first time somebody had pressed and squeezed fresh grape juice.
Yeah,
I leave you guys for 2 seconds and you're talking about fresh grape. What's going on here? This is DJs and Beers.
Well,
DJs and Beers.
Well, what happened is I asked her if Georgian wines are the best wines. She said, of course. And then I said, I had no idea that Georgia was a wine country.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, the wines there.
I was super impressed. And then we got into about this guy that invited to his house. He gave us like fresh made grape juice that he made at home. And I don't think I've ever had fresh grape juice like that.
I think Georgian, I mean, the history of winemaking in Georgia dates so far back. It's insane when you study it. And they were really heavily into this whole natural wine movement as well. You know, a lot of it stemmed from the way the Georgian winemakers produced their wine.
Yeah.
I remember playing, I can't remember what area of Georgia it was, but it was a festival called Gem Festival.
Yeah.
And the festival grounds, they had a wine bar. That's how serious Georgians take their wine. There's a like proper standalone wine bar on the festival grounds.
Yeah.
Do you like Georgian wine?
I mean, no questions asked.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's a little different. I think I was gonna actually ask you, David, was that grape juice or you were having like natural wines? Because that's very common as well, just like farm to table or vineyard to table, I guess.
I think it was just juice because I don't think it had alcohol in it.
Okay.
But I did.
It had no
I have
alcohol
that.
in it. It was fresh.
It was like fresh juice. Yeah, he just brought this big jug of juice out, and he was like, "I make this. This is homemade." And we're like, "Okay, cool." Or was it? No, it wasn't wine.
Well, Mo said he didn't remember.
No, it wasn't wine. It was
a good sign. So it's probably wine.
Well, the thing was because he was also pouring us shot after shot after shot of vodka.
Oh yeah, the cha-cha vodka. Cha-cha is like it's.
That's right, yeah.
Grappa, like grappa, which is made from grapes as well. It's really strong. Like one shot of that, you're 80 proof, like just so intense. But the wines it's more like what Ali was saying. It's more along the lines of like natural wines. It's some of it's an acquired taste. Like we have.
It's quite funky.
I like
put it mildly.
It can be funky, like the amber wines, the orange wines that are like kind of fermented underneath in barrels, like or in clay pots rather. It has a different flavor. It's definitely something that you kind of. The red wines are the ones that I like more in Georgian wines, I would say. And whites, I wouldn't say are my favorites in Georgian wines, but I think
they're quite milky and cloudy and funky smelling.
I like the funky stuff because
like,
it reminds me of certain beers, like farmhouse beers and stuff.
Yeah.
But Georgia's not really a beer consuming country, right? Not really.
No, definitely.
I can't really remember any specific beers.
Well, you know, it's strange also, like wine culture in Georgia, because like traditionally wine is like very much ingrained in our culture, right? But during like the Soviet Union, like the sort of like Russian influence, it became kind of borderline like alcoholism in the sense of like, okay, it's always on the table, but like we're now drinking a lot of it, right? And so like versus like, you know, I mean, I remember like the tradition of like Georgian wine in our culture being like a thing where like when you toast, there's like meaning to every toast, and like it's very family oriented, and there's like this like feast and process around it. And then it kind of just became like, okay, everybody's just chair-faced, you know? And so I'm really glad to see it going back to like, you know, people understanding that Georgia has really great wines and that there's like these like sort of like small companies that are, you know, and to see it being brought into really incredible restaurants, like, you know, walking into some of my favorite spots in New York and like seeing Georgian wines on the menu. It's a big thing for a small country, you know? But it wasn't always like that. So.
But is that? I feel like it was in Georgia. I could be wrong, but where the promoter took us out to dinner and made a point of explaining that before you toast, you have to say something really meaningful. That's what you're toasting for. And the guy got super deep, and then you know we had to toast, and we started to get deep or whatever. Is that in Georgian?
Yes.
Culture? Yeah, it's that. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that actually happened with us to the dinner we had with that guy. Remember, every time he poured us a shot, he would give a speech before we would drink it.
It was like a speech with everything, and he would toast everything. It was like,
and it would get emotional. I remember with the.
This guy got really emotional.
I mean, just for context for the listeners, we told this story before the show happened, but me and David, when we went out to Georgia and Tbilisi,
Did you say Tbilisi?
our drive.
Easy.
Sorry.
Is he saying it correctly, Sophia?
No, it's very hard because like the consonants are back to back, right? So you go Tbilisi. It's like it was Tbilisi.
The T is silent, right? Tbilisi.
No, it's not silent. It just kind of like flows over the B. So
Tbilisi.
Yeah.
It's in the
I'm
background.
not even going to try again. But the driver who picked us up from the airport, I had just asked him in passing if he knew anybody that might be able to show us around town because we just, as tourists, wanted to see it. And he offered himself. He says, "Yeah, I'll come and pick you up." And I naturally asked him, like, "Well, how much do you charge?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm not going to charge you. I'm just going to pick you up and I'm going to show you all around town." And this man was like, what, probably in his late 60s. He wasn't a young man by
Mid 60s.
mid 60s, whatever. So he picked us up in the morning and he did drive us around town. But the one thing that we did not expect was at the end of the night, he invited us. Well, didn't even really give us a choice. I'm not sure if it was an invite. It was just, he just drove us to his house and he planned a huge meal for us. I mean, he barbecued, he cooked, they served drinks for us.
We went to the market with him.
Yeah. He took us to the market. We did shopping.
We were in his car and we drove into the supermarket. He's like, "I'll be back. I'm gonna go buy some meat." And we're like, "Okay, I guess we're gonna have no choice to go to this party."
But it was an incredibly endearing experience. I mean, we sat down and had dinner with his entire family. They cooked an amazing meal. And afterwards, when his kids went to sleep, he wouldn't leave until we drank ourselves under a table with him. So that's pretty much the whole story.
Wow.
That's a very interesting point actually about like being in situations when you're on the road, right, where you're like part of it's like respectable and like just trying to pay your dues in a way, but then borderline being in very uncomfortable situations and like being able to draw that boundary. I remember in Tokyo, I played with like Kuniyuki Takahashi, and he was telling me this story about when he was like somewhere in Serbia, and it turned out to be like the party was owned, the promoters were like part of a gang, and like all of a sudden, because he only does live sets, he doesn't DJ, so he has 1 hour prepared for the show, and they're like, "No, you're not done." Like and there's guys in like AK-47s, and then he's like, "But I can only play 1 hour." So he's like, he played the same set like for 6 hours, just like over and over.
Wow, that's
and
funny.
It just reminded me of like that story you were saying, just like these situations where you just don't know what to do.
So Sophia, we talked about your record on Nervous. We don't know too much about it, but we know that you did a record on Nervous. Okay, so would you say the next big high point of your career was the Fall song on Get Physical, or
I did it somewhere for like Ministry of Sound in between as well. Like it was just like that kind of same like I don't really know how to like genreify that sound of like house that I was doing, but when I decided to finally go like start this new alias Sophia Says, I just so happened that like I found this vocalist on this subway and he was doing this like Tom York cover, and he had this like great falsetto range, and I was like, all right, you need to come record something. And he came in, we recorded it like in like an hour or something, and
it's a really accomplished
did, like, really well. And so Get Physical picked it up, and that was just people liked it. It was kind of popish, I guess, too, so it was relatable.
No, I think it was really, it had these dark undertones. The vocal was incredible. And was that a song, did you write that with the singer, or
I try not to be too tricky with like songwriting, although I do write a lot of poetry myself, so I'm like, it's hard for me to not like dive in and like kind of interfere, especially like tonally, like how like the just like the swing of like how singers will like they'll do a verse, and I'm like, but can we just like kind of skew it in this direction? So I try not to dabble too much, but it's inevitable. You kind of want to but also Eero, the guy who did that, he's like one of those guys that just sits down, he knocks it out, he was so quick with it. It just all flowed, and the structure of the track was kind of already there, so I had already made the beat, so it was very easy, and it did well. So that was definitely, like, I would say, like you said, sort of the next step after.
And so the same year you released the Solace EP. Is that an EP or an album? It had some remixes on it.
It was, technically it wasn't enough to be categorized as an album, but it was, there was like six tracks on there, I think, or 7 maybe. And that was my first I just launched my own label and just decided, hey, like, instead of trying to adhere, because I was writing so many different styles, instead of trying to adhere to one label, I'm just gonna start releasing stuff myself. And so I did the Salus record the same year.
And that was purely an instrumental album. So were you, was Fall like an experiment to see what you could do with the vocalist? Do you listen to music outside of electronic music that has vocals, or even within electronic music, like, you know, Motorrat?
Yeah. Well, I love Motorrat, Apparat, and like Sasha's like incredible. I've always been a huge fan. I write a lot of like down tempo music actually, and like I would say that's probably easier for me to write than club music because it was like a natural inclination from like song structure and like classical music and just and then I like worked at a recording studio for a bit where they were writing a lot of like pop music, and sort of working on a project now for Sony actually, which is like not it's not anything related to dance music whatsoever. It's like has bits of like, you know, sort of down tempo hip hop elements as well, and it's been really nice to like to visit that again, because it's hard to just always commit yourself to making club music, you know. So I work a lot with vocalists.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Do you feel, so you don't feel any pressure to be something like to just do the club thing? Like you feel like you're more of a multifaceted artist, and you can be accepted as all these shades of electronic music, you know?
I think I wouldn't lie and say that it's like I don't feel pressure. There's absolutely always pressure. But I think that also with where music has developed and the place it's in now, it's almost boring to only do that, in a way that it's opened up space for artists to be able to still dive into things. Sure, still have a consistent line, but to be able to diverge. And I wish that I like felt more of that earlier on, to have that kind of confidence, because there's basically what I'm saying is there's ways to own your sound while still being able to express yourself and like, you know, do different projects on the side. I do think consistency is important, absolutely, but I think that it limiting your creativity and it's starting to, you know, I mean, there were times where I was really struggling because I was like, you know, I want to put out this like, you know, broken beat record, but then I want to put out this like pop record, you know, and I couldn't because it just didn't make sense, right? I think that the more that's like kind of embraced, and like the more that there's like collaborations, I think is like a really interesting like way to, you mentioned like Madara, you know, and like I feel like they're a really prime example of like an act that have been able to like, you know, take on, they've still very much sustained their like presence in like the sort of like their techno foundation, but then, you know, they've gone on to do such incredible projects too. So there's space for it, I think, but it's definitely a struggle. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think if you establish that tone from the beginning, then you're always seen as this eclectic artist, and you're kind of accepted. Yeah. But if you do one thing for a really long time and shift gears, then that transition is always difficult.
Yeah, I tend to really appreciate that dynamic of different styles as well.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. Well, yeah, actually, yeah.
I mean, who doesn't want like techno cool and indie cred? You know, I think that's the ultimate.
That's Mo.
I think it's like the cool factor that we have to get rid of, because there's this sort of like stigma, you know, in like club culture that like if you are making anything else, or if you do, it's just like you're suddenly uncool, you're not being boxed. And this is so lame for and it just creates such a wrong example, and it creates this extra stress. Like, I mean, I have so many friends that, you know, and I've done it too, where you take on these aliases, but realistically, you just want people to be able to like follow your whole discography, right? And it's like, it's still you making this thing. Like, you're not suddenly uncool because you're making something else. If anything, that's
it's difficult to keep people's attention span. I mean, even for myself, I've received criticism whenever I would stop making techno and venture off into my side projects, and people are like, well, when are you going to go back and start making 4/4 techno again? And when I feel like it. And even if it's at a detriment to my own career, you just got to follow your heart and do what you love and what comes to you, you know, first and foremost, more than anything.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories from a techno producer sending like a demo to a label that they want to get on, and the label turning them down, and then they send it again under a different name, and they immediately get a response. Like,
yeah,
Yeah,
Well,
we want
optics
it.
play such a huge
Yeah.
role these days.
Later, they're like, well, I'm so and so as well, and they're like,
Oh, no.
yeah. baggage, and optics.
Yeah.
Sophia, your two albums, would you say it's like a double album? Was that released all at the same time?
Yeah, it was originally supposed to be a trilogy because it was like I just recorded way too much during that time, and like it was going to be like a 3-part series, and then kind of condensed it to the theme of like duality. So let's just do two, and we decided to do like separate the timing. But that was a really fun experience. It's just the whole album experience is just so different, right? Just sitting down and like.
So was that like when you sat down to record that? Did you sit down and say, I'm going to record an album, or were these ideas that you pieced together, for this kind of double album project? And the other thing that really struck me is how short the songs are. They're almost like tiny musical vignettes, most are under 3 minutes. Many are under 2. And was that a conscious decision? Like, how do you feel about getting your point across musically in such a short amount of time versus a long, there are some tracks, I think there's one or two, they're like 10 minutes or so, but how do you juxtapose the two?
I had followed like a lot of Francis Harris's work for a while, and I just always like appreciated his music. To be honest, I didn't really know that he knew about what I was making at the time, and he kind of, I guess he had heard some stuff, and he reached out and said, "Hey, would you be interested? I know about your classical background, dude," because he started sort of like neoclassical offspring.
Wait, who's this that you mentioned?
Francis Harris, who runs Red. Yeah, and so I guess I had started to think about it, but I'm always doing field recordings. Like it's a big thing for me. So I was always like collecting ideas and like inspirations, I guess. And at the time, just so happened, I was like on the brink of moving out of New York, and there was just a lot of things happening in my life on a very personal level, and like my family. And so I just kind of one time just decided to like sit down and just did like this crazy long. I do a lot of long sessions. I don't really do like the kind of short spurts. I tend to like when I sit down, it's usually like 16 hours, 18 hours. It'll just turn into a whole weekend. And there's just something about that process that I enjoy. So I just did like this, like, I think it was like an upwards of like 3 days that I didn't sleep. And I just like did this long jam basically. And I recorded like all of it. And I was weaving in a lot of old field recordings as I was going on. Some of it was just like straight piano improvs, things like that. And then I just kind of like sat back, I listened back to it. I just remember kind of breaking down and starting to cry because I was like, wow, okay, this is very heartfelt. And it felt very like accurate to what it was that I was trying to express, I guess. And that moment doesn't always happen, right? And so, yeah, and then I just kind of like cut it up, and it was intentional, the short bits. I remember like RA had something to say about that, and I was like, yeah, but that was the whole point, like the whole
that they were short.
Well, the fact that the length of it, but the thing is, like, that was intentional. It was supposed to be like a collection of memories, and it was supposed to be sort of like this. The idea was like, at least in my head, was that you were kind of like that I was grabbing the listener and just kind of guiding them through like different rooms or like different moments in these like in this timeline of and everything was very intentional, on that record. Like every little bit of it, every field recording, every even to the point of like the field recording that I used for like the hi-hat, there was like some specific memory tied to that moment. It was like so intentional. So I think some people got it, some people didn't, and that's okay. I just never actually had the chance.
Well, you can always rely on RA to mess something up. So
I mean, yeah.
RA are the experts, right? They know everything.
I mean, anyway, but we do have a really cool live show that we're gonna debut for that, which is like has a lot of very strong like visual components to it. We work with this like digital studio called Savage's Studio, and we've built out some incredible visuals for it. So unfortunately, we were about to do it this past March, but obviously everything got kind of shut. So,
are you when you're producing? Is the visual component always at the forefront of your mind? Do you see colors or images, or what do you see?
Absolutely, it's like it's 360 for me. Like I just like everything is just kind of, it's like I think it's tied to like the way that I first got into like electronic music. It was just that whole experience, you know. And I actually, Ali, I remember seeing your live show, and though this is not the same, I'm trying to remember if it was the same 80 in 2014, may have been. I think
New
it may
York?
have been, yeah, in
Or 80?
Amsterdam, 2014, the same year that I saw Mo's show.
Oh yeah,
And
that was
the
like a test.
panels, like the panels were incredible. Like, you know,
Yeah.
things like that really stand out in a performance for me, because it's like, yeah, sure, the sound is great, you know, but then that overall stimulation is just like such a different experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the audio. The audio component is great, but like the visual component and the lighting, it's just it's creating other, you know, atmospheres that lend itself to the music.
Absolutely.
And was it like you had remixers like Benjamin Damage and Roman Flugel, among others, remix your work? What was it like as an emerging, non-established artist, approaching these other established artists for remixes? What was that like? Was it difficult? Were there a lot of established names that turned you down because you weren't
I tried to always like lean towards artists that I had met or like had some kind of like, you know, experience with or interaction, or they, you know, liked my music or already, or but at the same time, I made a point to put myself in uncomfortable situations sometimes and just cold call somebody that I, you know, just to do it, you know. And some were, for the most part, I would say everyone was like very respectful, and has always, of course, you're always going to get somebody who's in a bad mood and doesn't have something nice to say. But for the remixers that I did pick, I always wanted to make sure that they enjoyed the record, because for me, it doesn't make sense to have a remixer that doesn't want to be remixing it, you know. So because it just comes across in the music, right? The output is not going to sound good. So most of the remixers that I had picked were people I, you know, had met, but I've also cold called, like, you know, we all have.
We all have.
It's part of it.
Could you tell us a little bit about Dusk and Haze, your label imprint? Like, what's it about? Where you plan on taking it? Anything?
Yeah. Well, the label I started primarily to just like to have a voice for myself when I couldn't fit in a box, right? When I didn't, there wasn't a label that I had to like kind of force myself into, or, you know, I didn't want to have that pressure. I just wanted to be able to make music and release it when I wanted. But then also I realized, like, for other people to have a similar voice. So I decided, like, there's so many other artists, you know, who are in the same position as me, who don't necessarily want to have one genre and one style. But initially we started out just throwing parties. So we were throwing like, and we started to scale more and more. Then we were starting to do some pretty big warehouse raves in New York. And the last few started to get riskier. And the last one, I had like maybe like 1,500 people, or we were expecting like 3 that night, and we got shot really bad.
Wow.
And that was kind of around the time where a lot of warehouses were starting to get shot in like 2016 or so in New York. And that was kind of the end of that. And I took a pretty big hit and decided it's time to start the label. And so decided to start focusing on the label. It was always in the vision. It just never felt like the right time. So finally decided to start it. And we were kind of slower with our release schedule, but at the same time, like, I don't believe in this idea of forcing releases, because I mean, you just, for something that's more as like conceptual as what we do, you know, and it's like I like every detail of the release to be tailored to the intent of the artist. So like every aspect of it, you know. So like I was looking at Actresses, the album, the one that he just put out, I think yesterday, he did the phone call, like you have to call in to get the preview of the record, you know, and it's like that's incredible. Like that's so awesome, because that's how I, like, those are the experiences that got me into making music, you know.
Absolutely.
God,
do you have any stuff planned out on Dusk and Haze coming out anytime soon?
Yeah.
I think the most important question is there a drum cell release coming out?
I would love that. I mean, I would absolutely love that. I mean, Mo's been a huge inspiration without saying. But we do have a drum and bass record coming out. Well, not a drum solo record, but drum and bass record coming out. Yeah, it's actually a collab between myself and a newcomer, a friend of mine. It's like a drum and bass, like broken beat record, which I'm pretty excited about, and that's going to be out in November.
There's a ton of like I don't know if you guys have heard these tracks, but they're the same tempo and same groove as drum and bass, but they're techno records. And they're really super. I'll make a folder, Sophia, and I'll send you.
Yeah, I would love to hear those. Yeah.
Some insane every once in a while, usually on hard wax when I'm shopping for music, I come across these things and they're so incredible, and I'm just like waiting for a good, the right gig to play like an hour of them, because I've amassed so much over the years. And you cannot fit it in either the drum and bass category or techno. It's kind of this in between genre.
I think it's like that kind of that rave
UK hardcore.
Yeah, like the really early 90s UK rave stuff there. Because it was like, if you go to that stuff, it's like 130, 135 BPM. So it totally makes sense. You can mix it
But
with
not even. It's more like experimental. I'll make you guys all.
Oh, more
Yeah,
experimental.
we'd love to hear that.
Because like, what's that? There's that one producer that does a lot of stuff. Is I think it's Special Request.
Yeah,
Like
that's Paul Wolford. He's a very old friend.
Legend. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, so he does that. He does like that 130 BPM kind of drum and bass, almost broken beat tracks, which are just like incredible, amazing. Total like throwback to like the early 90s.
Yeah.
Sophia, you're the other thing that really struck me in listening to your music. It seems like there's a cinematic quality to it, like it could be the soundtrack of a yet to be made movie.
I would love to get into film score production. That's definitely like
I was going to ask you about that.
I've started working on like in the past couple of years some like shorter films and like doing. It's just it goes back to what we were saying about just visualizing music. Just being able to like connect the dots. I mean, I know Mo does a lot of this, and it's like it just everything comes full circle in that moment, and you're like, this is it. This is the full essence of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Are you fans of like Cliff Martinez or Sakamoto or
Yes.
Albanoto?
Yes, of course. Albanoto is incredible. I actually it was one of the first few records that I ever bought. But I think there's just something about not necessarily like film score production in the sense of like just a stylistic thing. It's just the process and like the way it connects everything. It's just like it all makes sense to me. I don't know. And I think just like the intimacy of like the recording process. Everything has meaning. Sometimes and equally mindless dance music can also have meaning, and then meaningful dance music can also. Everything has its place. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a good example, just off, thinking about it as we're talking about it, like you were talking about like the intensity of classical music in relation to techno. The album From Sleep from Max Richter comes to mind.
Oh yeah.
Which is something, it's super repetitive.
Yeah.
And the repetition is happening with different voices and instrumentation. And then there's like 2 incredible ambient songs on there that sound mind-blowing. I don't think it was designed to be played on a club PA or festival PA, but those 2 ended up kind of opening and closing my sets for like 2-3 years. And it really set the tone for the beginning of the set. So I understand what you mean about that.
Yeah, Max Richter is incredible.
It can be intense. Yeah,
definitely.
Coming from a musical background, do you feel like when you're making maybe some like dance floor techno or anything, do you try not to let the musical part influence your productions and just have a more experimental feel to it? Or is it the musical, what's the word I'm trying to find? Well, just music theory in general, does that dictate how your music's coming out? Do you feel like that's a kind of an obstacle?
Actually, it's absolutely an obstacle. I think people think that because you have like a music background that you can just like, I always say like you can be an incredible musician doesn't mean you make good music, you're just because you're skilled doesn't. And it took me
a lot of incredible musicians are working in like music shops selling.
And
selling gear.
And I think this is like overly sort of like too much knowledge is not necessarily great sometimes because it starts to seep into your creativity, right? it took me a long time to break away from that. My initial projects, when I open them up, it's just like, it's a disaster. Like I look at it just like being unable to commit to like a melody. So I'd have like, you know, so many like iterations of chord progressions, and it's just like, it's so unnecessary, you know, and just being able to simplify that. And some of it's like confidence building as well, I think, in yourself, just like trusting your senses. But absolutely. And I've sat down in like some sessions with like incredibly like talented, like trained musicians, and it's just awful, you know, because they're just so in their head. They're just, you know, it's such a different way of working.
And yeah, because like it feels like, I mean, I'm not musically trained. I don't know music theory at all. Everything I do is just by ear. But I feel like if you work with someone like that, it's like there's like so many rules they want to stick by, and it's just like, no, but like you don't necessarily have to stick to these rules, because it's electronic music, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be always correct, and it doesn't always have to be completely off, you know what I mean? So like I usually ask
color outside the lines.
Yeah.
Like, Sophia, does your classical music background, was that something that you had to unlearn to make the style of music that you're making now? Do you find that it was a hindrance where you wanted to go creatively, or do you look at it? Because I think another way of looking at it is you could be in a situation where you have a vocalist or you have some other need for a particular project to draw upon this classical music background that you have. You know, maybe they, you know, the engineers or the other artists that you're collaborating with or whatever it is you're doing, they're viewing you as the artist you are today. But then you can draw from those past, you know, your studies in classical music and have it inform whatever current project you're doing, you know? So
no, absolutely. I mean, you know, like I think it's a combination of things, you know, like it doesn't really just happen in one way. I think that there is an element of unlearning, but that's more of like on an internal level. I think technically really what's happening is you're actually like developing, if anything, right? Because every time you learn how to, every new genre that I learned how to make, you know, like, and I force myself to just kind of sit down sometimes and challenge myself, like, okay, I want to make, so I'll just pull in any song, track, whatever, and just try to deconstruct it and remake it to learn how it's made. And I feel like it was definitely a hindrance, like on a personal level, because it was like my head was not wrapping around it. You know, it's just such a different way of approaching the studio. But then at the same time, I had so much more to offer that I wouldn't have had to offer that I wouldn't be able to do if I didn't have that background. So it's kind of like a mixed bag, you know, and it was just a lot of hours until you finally figure out a way to be able to weave in both things. Because I can't say it's totally a hindrance either, right? Obviously, like when you know, the more you know, the better it is as well. It's just that everything has its ceiling, you know. So
nice. So the real important question now is, have you done any streams?
No, I haven't. I'm so excited.
What? No streams?
No streams.
What's wrong with you?
I know, I haven't. And I'm really happy I haven't, actually, because I think in August, I wrote about like 40 new tracks, you know, and I've just been 100%, not to say that one doesn't, you know, it doesn't, you know, but like when you're really indulging in the studio, it's also such a nice feeling, because I haven't had that in so long. But I am planning a stream, and I am planning a live stream as well, like for my live show as well. So I'm gonna do two probably over the next few months, hopefully.
So you've been able to be productive during this time, like you're able to get to that mindset.
100%. Cool. You know, it's weird because everybody's saying that being home, they don't want to make dance music. Like for me, it was the opposite. Like when I was touring, I was making less dance music, and I found that's because I'm so happy at home. Like, you know, so I feel like this mood, so I'm making like even more intense dance music than I've ever made. I'm like doing these drum and bass records, you know, like sometimes dabbling in hardcore, but you know, but I wasn't doing that last year when I was touring. I don't know. I think I've just like found like a happy space just being back in the studio again. So
I kind of have a theory about that, because I'm kind of the same, where like, you know, a lot of producers are just like, there's no clubs, there's no parties to play these records, so like I'm not into making dance music, and I'm like kind of the opposite, even though I'm still kind of making the same sort of vibe. But I feel like the people who are into making these records, they're not getting any influence from the clubs anymore. So like let's say you make a
Yeah.
dance track and you do a drum and bass record, you don't know how it's going to sound in the club. So you don't have to worry about trying it out in the club and be like, okay, this works. So now it's just like, I'm just going to make dance records, and who cares
Yeah.
if it doesn't work or not. So I feel like that's my
Yeah.
little theory about.
I guess when everything opens back up, we'll find out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe at
Then
that
it might be
point,
like everything you made the last year sucks on a big system.
that could be very true. Or it could also be the opposite, where
Or
people
the opposite, yeah.
people are so happy to be on the dance floor again. You can play anything and people are like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. You can drop drum and bass in a
Or
tempo.
maybe it sucks on the sound system, but everybody could just label it as lo-fi.
Yeah.
It'll just be a new
That's
genre.
another
Yeah,
Sophia,
totally.
do you get caught up in all the terminology and trying to describe the style of music? Like there's experimental, broken beat, glitch, grime. I mean, there's so many different.
It's all so annoying. I try not to, you know, but obviously for the purposes of just, you know, it's inevitable. But I mean, realistically, nothing is anything, right? Everything is borrowed from one another. It's just it's so hard. It's so difficult for me to accept when people are like really committed to their like, and I'm like, okay, I respect your loyalty, but you know, it's like it's just not the way music works. Everybody gets influence from different things, so.
But sometimes you're in conversation with somebody that does not understand music, and they're like, "So, what kind of music do you make?"
Oh right, yeah.
And then you're like,
Good music.
"How do I answer this question?" So, what do you say?
Yeah,
I'm putting you on the spot. Sorry.
No, yeah, I mean, it depends on the person, really. Like, I feel they like, you know, if they're really disconnected or I really don't know, I'll just say that I make like electronic music. Keep it like very short, you know. Yeah, electronic music. I would
Electronic
say.
music. Or
Yeah.
That's a
IDM.
perfect answer too. That's a perfect answer.
IDM? Are people still using that word
EDM.
IDM?
Not as much as you would think. Not so.
I do. I call
use
everything I
IDM?
make IDM now. in just kidding kind of way all the time. It's like, oh, check out my new IDM track, man. It's dope.
That's a funny term too. Intelligent. Yes.
Right.
But I feel like I haven't heard that term being used lately. Like no one really more people would say experimental over.
Yeah, I agree.
I wonder, why is that? Is it because it's not dance music?
I mean, but what is
IDM
experimental these days, anyways?
That's the
I mean,
thing,
we've kind of
yeah.
like
Something you can't dance to, I think. Right?
I guess.
More listenable music. Because IDM still has a dance music title to it. Intelligent dance music? I don't know. I just feel like I haven't heard the term IDM being thrown around.
I mean, there's a crazy artist named Burnt Friedman. I don't know if you guys have heard of Burnt.
Yeah, I remember him. Of course.
Yeah, makes the craziest music you've ever heard in your life, and you can kind of dance to it, but it's definitely experimental. But you can dance to it. Like I imagine myself in a club being able to dance to Burnt Friedman's music, but it's very experimental.
To a 7/8 beat.
My buddy Kiro just drops IDM on everything, even when it's not related to music. Like if you're driving like a crazy looking car, you'll be like, dude, that car is IDM as fuck, man.
It makes sense. Kiro.
Well, dancing is also very subjective, right? I mean, dancing can also be very experimental. Depends how you
totally.
Very true,
Yeah,
actually. That's a good point. Yeah.
A lot of my friends are experimental dancers. I can't take them anywhere.
Yeah. Crazy.
Oh, man.
And Sophia, so the other burning question is, what do you feel about your colleagues in the industry doing gigs right now in the middle of a pandemic, no less?
Well, okay. So I feel I was having this conversation with CEO earlier, actually, Mo. But I think, you know, here's the thing. Like everything is situational, like the timing, region. Like I feel going into it, my stance was a lot more aggressive in the sense that it was the timing too, right? Like it's like if we're doing this, like when things are peaking and when things are like very, you know. But at the same time, it's like, you know, the first people to kind of go back out into the field are going to get a lot more criticism, right? So I think at this point, like, you know, there's going to have to be a point where things open back up, right? I feel like taking it day for day, being a little bit more understanding. I feel like, like I said earlier on, I was a little bit more aggressive in my stance, you know, but it was also the timing, you know. I mean, at that point, it was like things were looking really bad, you know, and I think that as things are easing up, you know, seeing things outdoors, I think, you know, I think forcing like the full festival experience outdoors is a little weird, because you're like, it's just because it's like there's these videos, like 50 people, and they're like all have their own little tables, and it just looks odd visually, right? But I have been seeing
That's IDM.
That's IDM.
We've nailed it, guys. We figured it out. All this time it was looking at us.
But I mean, look, like the other thing is like this could go on for a really long time, right? And like we do have to think about ways of like making it sustainable and like starting to weave and just making like wise decisions and like what's responsible, what's not. And there are some blurry lines, but for the most part, we know which promoters are the ones that are doing things correctly, which artists are being like responsible about how they're, we don't necessarily need to be like promoting like a full festival experience yet, because we're not necessarily there yet, but I do think that there's something to like, restarting parties and like, because it's also like, this is everybody's livelihood, and like outside of everybody's livelihood, there's a whole industry behind this, and I do think that there's some value to like being more open to that.
You think there's a certain symbolism that comes with taking a position and playing? Like, let's say you get a call from the Bassiani guys and they're like, listen, the government is letting us open for this one party and we want you on the lineup. It's a legal party. What do you say?
Well, they did start doing some outdoor stuff. Actually, Bassiani started doing a festival, I think like a semi, but again, like geographically it's different in every place. I think that doing a lot of like smaller parties is definitely the way to go. If anything, I think that actually like reinforces like the foundation of a lot of this, right? Like I think that we should actually be open to that, but not, again, when I say small parties, like I think a lot of the smaller private stuff, but depends who's doing it, depends who the promoters, depends what their motive is, depends like, there's many factors. I think it's hard to just say yes or no to all of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's so many shades to it, but the problem is that there's so many people online on the internet who are just willing to judge without having to look into those shades. So there's a lot of shaming going on, and that's why yeah. I mean, that's why it's in particularly a bigger issue more than anything. My stance on it has been like, look, I can't really make any judgment on any other country but where I live in my environment and my particular community. So obviously being in Los Angeles, we're still in a rather dire situation, and I'm not going to jump and make any judgments on what other people are doing in other countries when I don't have all the facts. But I will jump down the throat of somebody who might do something in my community, in my area, that would probably threaten the livelihood of my colleagues and people I work with, and maybe even pushing the situation of us getting back to work further because of their recklessness, So it is very much just country to country based, what's best for people. And I don't have all the answers. I can only speak for myself,
And also here in LA, it's not like there's tons of clubs that have techno music. So it's like a very underground scene, and you also don't want to put this huge spotlight with these like illegal parties that are plague raves, quote unquote. Absolutely. And then it's going to totally like put the spotlight on the underground parties, and it's like, well, shit, now you're going to ruin it for everybody, It's so much.
Yeah, because our infrastructure is already pretty fragile as it is already, being the fact that all of the events that we play and the kind of music that we do are already illegal as it is. So you can't legitimize them and make them legal, especially now,
It's like you have to keep it quiet and keep it as quiet as you can. And now like everyone, especially in LA, people are getting busted for throwing these like big mansion parties. So like now there's like the eye on for looking for anyone throwing some sort of party that they want to like focus on the media and get people riled up. And
we got drones now in our society. Drones are flying around over the mansions and villas in Ibiza and checking up on.
And in people. California, if you get caught throwing a party, they'll shut your power off. It's not about shutting you down. They'll just shut your power off.
Yeah.
Damn,
I'm gonna have to get some drones of my own, man.
Yeah.
Mo wants
Sophia,
to
what-
go to look for parties. Like, where can we go party?
Yeah.
Sophia,
Where
what
can
do
we
you
go?
have? What do you have coming up? What can we all stay on the lookout for?
Yeah, I have a couple records coming out this fall, and then for next year, I mean, at this point, nobody knows from performance standpoint, right? So predominantly just like working on debuting this live show, which I didn't have the chance to do, doing a stream finally, having this couple of releases, and then just like organizing my release schedule for next year. But outside of that, I can't really, comment on shows because nobody knows yet, right? So.
Yeah.
What?
Well, I want to bring attention to the fact that tomorrow is Bandcamp Day. So
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you could tell everybody where they can maybe go to
No,
your
it's
Bandcamp
not.
and
It's
get
not
your
tomorrow.
music.
Every
Yeah, it's Friday. This thing.
No, it's
this Friday.
it's the Friday. It's the first Friday of the month.
No, they
I
changed
think
it, right? They
this
changed
is
I think it's every Friday now, no?
Yeah, now it's every Friday.
Oh wow, really? I didn't know that. I thought it was only the first Friday of every month. Well, okay. That's cool.
I don't know. I got an email saying it was tomorrow. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
regardless, there's one either coming up or it is tomorrow. But it'd be nice to hear where people can support your music directly because artists need direct support from everybody. So
Yes.
Yeah, the Bandcamp stuff has been incredibly helpful. I think like it's almost like surreal to think about just like direct to consumer link. It's amazing. And just like being able to like just have that direct connection now without the stigma of like you need this middleman, it's just it's all evaporated. It's incredible.
yeah,
Do you have a Bandcamp page?
I do, yeah. I love Bandcamp. I think we're still like leagues away from like this like perfect formula for how music is consumed, but I think we're definitely like Bandcamp is a huge step in that direction. But hopefully we can kind
what's
of.
your Bandcamp page called? Where can people go and get some of your tracks?
Or days.
Sophia Days.
Yeah.
Okay.
David, can we get your custom beer glasses on your Bandcamp from your Bandcamp page? No? What?
They're all,
Right. I saw those. They were awesome.
they're all sold out. Yeah. And I never put them up on Bandcamp. I just do like I did an Instagram kind of blast, and luckily people enjoy them enough to where they sold out pretty quickly. So I'm working on doing some more merch, some t-shirts finally. I get asked a lot about t-shirts, so that's coming up. And I hate to plug all my own music while we have a guest here, but I have another release coming out on my new label, Work Tracks. So that's coming out.
Is that the one that you sent us that you're like, this is a little ghetto, but
yeah, it's like the
amazing.
Chicago, it's the Chicago ghetto style stuff.
Oh, awesome. When is that out?
That's coming out next Monday.
Yes, nice.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, it was a total pleasure.
Yeah, for sure.
And I hope we can do this soon. David, the last time I saw you, we were in Amsterdam, right? Yes.
Yeah. It was at
a lot of fun.
DJ, I think it was at Speedy J's gig.
Yeah. And I was saying that to Joachim. I feel like a lot of this is like the streams have. It feels like what it would feel like catching up with everybody in the backstage, right?
Backstage,
hey, what have you been up to? So it's nice to have that feeling again.
Yeah, totally. It's like the backstage.
Absolutely.
What's
Totally.
going on?
Sophie, also, I wanted to formally welcome you from me to the Bullet Bookings family as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That announcement was made today or yesterday, I think. Keep doing what you're doing. The music's incredible. I think we all look forward to what you got coming out, especially the live show. Really curious to see that. Stay positive, stay healthy, and
keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for being on the show.
It's been such a pleasure. It was awesome
to see everybody again.
Cheers.
Till the next one. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Cheers, guys. Take care.
Cheers.